Hello, everyone. I'm Kari Vogelgesang, your host of the Educator Wellness Podcast, here to share and promote my life's work and passion, all things wellness. But not just any wellness. We're here to discuss wellness specifically as it pertains to educators. I am a former elementary school teacher, and I am passionate about helping educators see wellness in a very different way. This podcast is dedicated to educators across the globe, creating a space for us to come together in an authentic and therapeutic way, sharing our stories, our hopes, our joys, our fears, our sorrows, and hopefully creating some space to share some laughter with one another as well. In our journey to learn how to support one another to prioritize wellness and enhance our overall well-being. Please join me as we talk with nationally recognized experts to guide us on a transformative journey of self-discovery, helping us to embrace and weave all dimensions of wellness into the fabric of both our personal and professional lives. Also, please note that the opinions and perspectives that are shared on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the Scanlon Center for School Mental Health or the University of Iowa. Today, we hear from special guests, Jeff Johnston and Drew Martel. Jeff Johnston founded his own nonprofit in 2020 called Choices Network. This nonprofit is dedicated to educating kids, parents, teachers, and coaches on the importance of making positive choices. That same year, in 2020, he wrote his first book, This One's for You, an inspirational journey through addiction, death, and meaning. He also started the Living Undeterred project, which aims to build a network of contacts and resources to help develop alternative solutions to the mental health and addiction crisis. Drew Martel is the Director of Crisis Services at Foundation 2 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where he oversees the crisis line, Your Life Iowa, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and mobile crisis outreach programming. Drew is also a site surveyor for the American Association on Suicidology and provides therapy at Meadowlark Psychiatric Services. In this episode, we talk about the effects that substance use and abuse have on the brains and bodies of children, adolescents, and adults. We talk about how substance abuse affects our relationships, families, and our communities, which of course includes our school communities. Difficult questions are asked and powerful stories are shared. Please know that some of the information and stories shared today may not be suitable for young children and could trigger intense and uncomfortable feelings for certain listeners. I encourage you to listen in a safe and comfortable environment and think through the various supports you have access to if needed. Please join me as we learn more about the substance abuse challenges that are taking place in our very own communities. Well, good morning, Jeff. How are you?
I am doing wonderful. I have been chasing a fly for an hour down here, and finally I got him like 5 minutes ago. So I've been doing this all morning. But anyway, I'm good. I got my coffee, and I really am excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us. I'm also very excited to have this conversation. I know it's a conversation that can be uncomfortable sometimes, but it's definitely one that we need to have. So welcome, everyone. As we mentioned in the opening, we are going to be talking about substance abuse, particularly substance abuse with teachers and with students in our schools, and how substance abuse in the family can impact students in schools, and then how that impacts school communities. So we have a lot to kind of unpack and to talk about today. Jeff has done so much work in this area for many years now. And his story is one of the most powerful stories I've heard in a long time. I met Jeff last year, and I actually was a guest on his podcast. So let's just go ahead and get started, Jeff, with some of what we want to talk. We've talked about talking about in this show.
I feel like this conversation. We've had plenty of talks about this, and I'm excited to see where it goes today. But no, I'm honored to be here. My story, unfortunately, as painful as it is to share and for people to probably listen to, it's not uncommon. I just today saw a post of a high school wrestling star that actually is from California, and he committed to Luther here in Iowa, but he overdosed. He died fentanyl poisoning. And I don't know how old he was, but he was in high school. it just seems like, every day it's another death, another story, another person that loses the fight with, whether it's, substance abuse, addiction, suicide. And it's like, we got to draw a line in the sand. Somebody's got to take a stand. We can't do this alone. You know that. It's all hands on deck. And so, yeah, in my situation, I went pretty unscathed most of my life until about age 50. And at that point, looking back now, I didn't know how good I had it. 50 years old, happily married to my wife, Prudence, 3 kids, kind of at that point where I felt good. I've worked hard my whole life, and this is kind of where I can start kind of winding things down. And little did I know that things wound up pretty quick.
Yeah. Can you tell me, so this is something I don't think we really have talked a lot about in terms of, you kind of start your story at age 50, and you say, up to age 50, you were unscathed. Like, do you mean like unscathed in terms of you really hadn't had much experience in your family or yourself with addiction or with substance abuse issues in the home or personally or with a family member?
Yeah. Unscathed, I would say, from a standpoint of trauma and grief. We had grandparents pass away and pets pass away, but I never had anything really close get taken from me. And so, but when it did happen, it exposed a lot of personal demons that I had that I wasn't aware of.
Sure.
Alcoholism since high school. So I've been a 33-year alcoholic. When I say alcoholic, I'm self-assessing. I'd never been clinically diagnosed, but I knew I had a problem. 5-6 days a week, social drinker. Never really had situations where I blacked out or anything like that, but it never really impeded my work because I own my own company. So
Sure.
I didn't have to phone in and tell the boss I'm hungover. I just didn't go to work. So, and that adds to the problem. It's almost self-enabling. By being an entrepreneur, you almost self-enable because I didn't have the guardrails. Someone couldn't call me and say, "Hey, come to work." I just say I don't want to go. So, and then I had a gambling addiction for about 20 years as well. And as a owner of an investment firm, Premier Investments of Iowa, which I just left, I just sold a month or 2 ago.
Oh, wow. Congrats.
Yeah, my heart's not in it. My heart's in kids. My heart's with young adults, Gen Z. It's not with making money anymore. And that's something that took a long time for me to be humbled through death, that there was more important things in my life than the pursuit of, success and fame and those type of things. So anyway, I had those 2 underlying addictions, alcoholism and gambling that I think, especially the gambling, doesn't get talked about today. I think I saw a statistic, and maybe you know this better, Dr. Kari, like 6% of college students have a serious gambling problem, and the majority of them are young men.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
We, every once in a while, will get information like from our student services group here on campus. And every once in a while I'll see, it'll be something on gambling, and especially obviously during like football season and basketball season, these things kind of come up. But, it's something that we don't talk about. There's lots of shame about this. I think that makes us with any addiction, that makes us not want to talk about it. And so that's, I guess, one of the reasons why we're here today, right? Like,
I think
on those walls.
I think one of the biggest challenges we have as advocates for improving the lives of people is this sense of helplessness, because it's really a big game of whack-a-mole. It's like, you've got one area, like I'm a compulsive gambler, so I fix that. And then it seems like something else pops up. Now I'm more anxious or more depressed. Now I'm drinking more. Now I'm overweight. I'm not going to the gym. I'm watching more toxic things on TV. And so now I go to the gym and lose 40 pounds. Well, now I can't make my car payment because I don't have a good job, and I spend my money on stupid things. So my relationship with money's poor. These things all permeate within each other and from each other. And that's the challenge is, it's so easy for us as advocates, Dr. Kari, to see something and go at it, try to eradicate it, like I did early in my journey with fentanyl. And then you realize that, even if I did that, it's not going to fix the underlying problem of increasing the lives of young adults and giving them a sense of purpose. So when their feet hit the bed in the morning, they go, wow, I'm really happy to have this opportunity. I'm honored to be alive today. they don't have that spark. And that again, that carries over with educators. These large groups of kids are coming to school already in a very poor place mentally. That has to weigh on the teachers and the faculty, and all the way down to the janitor. You got to feel that culture in the school that sense of heaviness when people aren't happy.
Oh, it is definitely felt. One of the things we're working really hard on right now through the PD arm of the Scanlon Center, and that has just become such a crisis, is school avoidance and chronic absenteeism. And, there's multiple reasons why kids aren't coming to school. And but they're not. And actually, it's not just our community. It's not just the state of Iowa. It's not just actually our country. It's global. We've been doing some work over in Finland and in Norway, and countries that we have oftentimes looked to and thought of as like the countries that have education figured out, right? Which, of course, that's problematic in and of itself. But
right.
You get what I'm saying. So they're even saying the same thing. We have serious attendance issues because going back, Jeff, to what you were just talking about and what we've talked about in the past, previous conversations between the two of us, the purpose just doesn't seem to be there. That feeling of, when we talk about wellness in the Scanlon Center, we do talk about holistic wellness, like these 8 dimensions of wellness.
Yeah.
Financial wellness, occupational wellness, physical wellness, and emotional wellness. And one of those is spiritual wellness, and that has to do, it's not tied to a religion, but your purpose.
Right.
And that is a piece when we do this work that just seems to be lost. People can't seem to align or even identify personal values now. And it's an area that we need to start talking about and figuring out.
Well, you got my mind spinning. I've got like a number of different areas I wanted to take from what you said and highlight it. But one thing that comes to mind that I heard someone say a while ago that just really, literally just shook me, is education is far easier than action. Yeah. And I think one of the things we have with our system is it's so predicated on education. And we need to build the systems to get people in action. Education's great. And the best example I can tell you is this. We know more today than we've ever known in the history of humanity about healthy eating. Everything you put in your mouth has a label on it. Saturated fats, carbohydrates, calories, everything. Now sugar content's a big thing. Yet in the last 30 years, we've become the heaviest industrial country in the world, and we're getting bigger, but we know more. So there's a massive disconnect between, do we need another label on a candy bar? Do we need another podcast, another book about how to lose weight? Or do we have to go back to prevention, less treatment, and focus on changing behavior, or if anything, intervening before the intervention? So I think the answer to this problem that we have, that's just, set up for decades ahead of us, if not centuries, if we don't make changes, especially with Gen Z, is to take a 60-second time span and give us 66 days, because that's what it takes to change behavior. And we're dealing with a generation that has 60-second time spans. And we know through behavior modification and all the different methods out there that now it says, and based on research I saw, it takes about 66 days to change behavior. So we could have a pep rally at a school, bring in a motivational speaker, talk to kids. That's great. I highly doubt it's changing behavior, though. Yeah. And maybe if it does one, I'm all for it. I'm not telling advocates that we need less. I'm saying we need more of other things. It's not a zero-sum game. If we invent apps and we invent systems and processes that can change behavior, it doesn't mean we're lessening the impact of motivational speakers and people that go to schools and put on these tremendous assemblies. We still need that, but I don't think that is how we get out of this problem. I think it's a combination of that and more things that we can talk in a little bit.
Yeah. No, I agree. So let's go back a little bit. So if you're at your age 50, what happens?
Well, I'm sitting there, pat myself on the back, how great I've done everything, and, ignoring a lot of my problems that were brewing in my family. And Seth was 23, Ian was 15, and Roman was 13. 3 boys. My wife was, we had a great, I mean, everything was great. And then like it does to every single one of us at some point, 100% probability. It's just, it's not if, it's when. I get the call at 6:30 in the morning on October 4th, 2016, and my life changed. Part of me died, but part of me was born. I have to look at it that way. They found our oldest son, Seth, overdosed, poisoned by fentanyl up in Waterloo, Iowa. It was the end of a 6-year horrific, horrendous, painful journey of watching my son self-destruct, and there's not a damn thing I could do about it. I have no regrets in my efforts to try to help Seth, but I have regrets in what I know now about Adderall, what I know now about prescriptions, what I know now about listening. I could have been a better dad in hindsight. So I can't be that for him in life. I can now in death, but what can we do to help the kids so nobody has to go through what I went through again? It's not just about trying to avoid the pain that I went through. How about Seth's pain?
Yeah.
I mean, how about Seth? I mean, I don't care about me. I really don't. I mean, I've been through a lot. I'm pretty resilient. I not have my coping mechanisms, but what about Seth? He'd been 29 this year, you know, and when he died, 3 weeks later, his beautiful daughter was born, and that's, her name is Brighton. That's the name of, our project is named after my granddaughter, but it's like, you know, this didn't have to happen, Dr. Kari. This was preventable, yet it was predictable. And so that happened. And immediately, you know, I went into protection mode, you know, as stereotypical man of the family. It's like, okay, one man down. I gotta right this ship. I gotta get my family back. I felt that obligation as a male, whether that's you know, not appropriate to say today. I don't really care.
No, it's what you felt.
That's how I grew up.
And that was part of your story and your experience, and your feeling in it.
Right. And so I thought, okay, I need to say something to the boys. So the day Seth died, my wife's over to my right, my 2 boys are on the left. And I just presented this as an opportunity for them. And I just said, boys, you know, and it became a chapter in my book. And it's really kind of formed this mindset of what I call better, not bitter, you know, the better road versus the bitter road. And I said to the boys, I said, you know, boys, we have one of 2 roads to go down. We have one road of anger, despair, and hatred. I was trying to think about this because I know I've explained this to you a few times, and I was going to apologize for having to explain this, and it threw me off track. No, we got one road of anger, despair, and hatred, and we can become alcoholics and addicts ourselves, or we have a road of inspiration and motivation, and this can be the single greatest moment in our lives and others around us to make a difference. I'm on the second road. I ask you to join me. So it was important for me to present this to my 2 boys who were only 13 and 15 at this time. At the moment of telling them their brother died, pivot quickly. Hey guys, you know what? We gotta pull our pants up, pull our boots up. We gotta go to work. We gotta make sure this doesn't become the defining moment negatively in our lives.
How did they respond to that? Were they on board right away?
Yeah, they both did great. Ian went on to do some amazing things with golf that today still just resonates throughout the world. He was named as the Young Iowan Philanthropist of the Year. He got the Jerry Cole Sportsmanship Award, which is given to one golfer in the world for fundraising activities. And so Ian and Roman really both leaned into it heavily, but I didn't. And I called my employees up and my business partner, I said, hey, Brock, I'm not coming to work for a year. I need to work on a lot of things. I need to work. My wife and I need to fix a lot of things. And we didn't. We just sat home and drank for 14 months. I got drunk 7 days a week, ballooned up to probably close to 190 pounds. Just, you know, called everybody in my head that I could find that was negative and threw a big pity party. And I watched my wife, this beautiful person, just slowly deteriorate just in front of my eyes. It's like watching a train wreck of your family members, and you're 100 feet from the cliff and your feet are stuck in cement and the train is just going and you can't do anything about it. And then on December 24th of 17, so a year and a half after Seth died, that was that 14 months, I decided to quit drinking, and my life changed immediately.
Okay, but now stop.
Yeah.
Because this is actually the question. because when I do wellness work, like this is the question that everybody has, but like, they've created some really poor habits in their life.
Yeah.
They know that, like they're aware of it, right?
Right.
They try to change and to pivot. Was there a moment? Was there a time? Was there something that happened or a switch? Do you remember what happened to make you be like, I'm done?
I remember two things. The night we had a condo in Florida that we bought to help with my son's golf career. And we drunk one night. So December 23rd, my wife and I and a couple of people got really drunk. And I just remember sitting on the couch watching my wife go back and forth from the kitchen to the bedroom, filling up her glass of wine. And I just thought to myself, man, I am the worst husband on the planet if I allow this to happen again under my watch. And that morning I got up and looked in my mirror and I said, I'm going to join my son pretty quickly here, either ending my life or drinking myself to death if I don't make changes. So, and I noticed my wife too was just, she went from, she was 9 years younger than me. So she was 46 when she died. But anyway, I went from looking at someone who was so vibrant to looking at someone who looked 70 years old. Mm-hmm. And I quit, and this isn't being narcissistic, but I quit to help her first. Mm-hmm. But I realized quickly, Dr. Kari, that a week after drinking, my life got better. I slept better. My stomach was better. My eyes looked better. My conversations were better. My memory was better. And then it turned into, 6 months to a year. Yeah. And then it pivoted from wanting to help her to realizing I can't, but I can help me. Mm-hmm. And I put the focus on self-care, and I haven't drank since. And on June 29th of 21, the day after Roman's, my youngest son's 18th birthday, they found my wife dead of alcoholism at the age of 46. So, now here comes death into my life as an opportunity to be better, not bitter. So, and it won't stop. Death will take more people I care about. It may take me, but I think one thing we can do in hindsight, looking at this as kind of the whole package, is how do we introduce the concept of death to young kids as part of life, instead of the way we sugarcoat it and create myths and fairy tales. And then when kids really find out the truth, they're either terrified or they try to numb it with alcohol and drugs. And I think we need to, as adults, stop telling kids lies. We don't have to tell them everything, but we need to let them have the data to make the informed decisions, to make self-assessment an easier process in their mental health relationship.
That's one of the conversations I wanted to have with you, because I hear when this topic comes up in the world of schools and curriculum and programs that have been a complete failure, and programs that, are starting to try to, take off, and they do have a little bit of evidence to support kind of the, we all know about the DARE program. There's evidence to support that people who implemented the DARE program, they ended up having more issues without substance abuse.
Yeah, exactly.
so like, this is the thing about this particular topic, where I'm so sick of people using scare tactics. Number one, just scaring the shit out of kids, because that doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
It, especially when they go home at night and they see their parents smoking a joint in the backyard and drinking every single night. Then they're like, this is a bunch of crap. Yep. But then I also, now we're living in this world, especially with weed, where we're like, it's not a big deal. And I can tell you that it's a big deal.
It is for that.
We know what these substances can do to the brains and bodies of children when their brains are developing, and when they're trying to learn strategies to cope with really strong emotions. They're trying to learn how to self-regulate. And if they're constantly going to a substance to numb themselves or to take them to a different place, and they're never able to really fine-tune those skills and those strategies, there are really long-term negative effects.
Yeah, especially with marijuana. Again, all these substances impact people differently, and the problem is with that Generation Z specifically, and now Alpha coming up behind it, is the prefrontal cortex, which you know much more about that than I'll ever know. But we know it's involved with decision-making and social behavior and planning and rationalizing and the things that these young kids are having problems with without the introduction of cannabis. And that just makes it more difficult. So yeah, I think, for us, when we started looking at ways to fix this problem or to add an arrow to the quiver, as I like to say, we wanted to talk to teachers. We wanted to figure out, I'm not a teacher. I'm a dad, business owner and a dad, but I'd like to hear from the teacher. So we did Cedar Rapids Prairie here. We did a pilot program. I made some presentations about our app coming out and things like that, but we were primarily there to get data, like you guys are doing. How do we build an app that can change behavior, engage kids, without the appropriate data? Well, you can't. So, but some of the stuff we got from the teachers was, it was like, I think 52% of the teachers that we surveyed, which granted was a pretty small sample, but I think you would probably feel this is probably indicative. 52% of them do not want to have conversations about mental health with their students. And the number of reasons, I was just looking at a couple of the answers here. I'm afraid I'm not qualified to address some of these serious issues. I don't have a lot of experience with substance abuse and a suicide. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I'm not comfortable at all. Not comfortable due to lack of training with the class of 25 students we take care of. I feel comfortable talking to students, but I don't feel I know the best resources to support them. So it's like, and the frustration is kids are coming to school now, probably before they even get their foot on campus, probably in the worst mental health place they've ever been in history. And we know now that based on our small pilot test is that half the teachers there feel ill-equipped. They don't feel confident. They feel like they're going to trigger it, say the wrong thing, maybe get blamed, maybe lose their job for trying to help. So it's just a cesspool of just a big problem we have. And I know you're working on solutions. I am too. A lot of people out there are. And I don't think there's one solution. No. I don't. And because there's not one problem, I think overall theme, like I said, how do we get kids when their feet hit the ground in the morning to have meaning and purpose, to have a healthy relationship with money, and to be in the best health to live the marathon of life, body, diet, exercise, things like that, yoga, meditation. How do you do all that? I don't know. I'm working on it. So are you. And so are a lot of people.
Yeah. I think that I really appreciate, this is the thing that I really appreciate about having, conversations with you, Jeff, is that you really do understand and see the complexity of this and how there are so many factors that are playing into this crisis, from social media to diet, to movement, to people feeling, to COVID, to people feeling ill-prepared to have these conversations. Then increase of substance abuse in the home with educators. We know that educators are reporting increased substance abuse issues that they're struggling with. It really is having to come to my office every morning, and you do the same thing, and try to take a step back and look at all of these factors that are playing into this, and trying to position people in ways where we can start to address each of those situations and each of those factors. But it is a complex societal problem that no one person is going to heal.
You're right. And I'm looking off the corner of my eye here at the survey, because I keep reading this thinking, man, I want to read this. I'm going to read this one quote that this teacher, 7th grade teacher, gave us out at Prairie. I would like to have something. So we're asking about mental health curriculum. I would like to have something that can be integrated daily and makes mental health routine, like math or science. Could be at homeroom or utilized by students throughout the day. That's what teachers are telling us. So it's like, here's the really good news though, Dr. Kari. Gen Z is the first generation of all time to have mental health, their number one New Year's resolution.
Yeah.
37% increase in Gen Zers seeking mental health treatment. Okay, let's look at that first subset. They're asking for help and they're getting help.
Yeah, they are.
But the problem is the numbers aren't. Maybe there's a lag time between help and the numbers improving. I'm not sure, but every time I see statistics on pretty much everything to do with Gen Z mental health, it's worse than it was 5-10 years ago.
Yeah.
You have to really look deep to find something that isn't. So they're telling us they have a problem. They're going to get help. What's out there isn't working. Teachers are telling us they're not equipped. It's like, okay, somebody's got to start building these processes that students and teachers can start using. At least then they can focus on why they're there, teaching kids the basics, and kids are focused on learning instead of being distracted.
I 100% agree with you. I do like where you started that. I think what you said is really important. Okay, so like the good news, right, is that there's an awareness.
Yeah.
At least there's that.
Yeah, and they're open.
And they're open.
Yep.
But you are right. In some areas, we know that, there are, in our more urban areas, there are more mental health providers. There's still oftentimes a wait list, but there are more providers. There are different avenues and different ways of getting services to students and to kids and to teachers. In our rural communities, it's rough.
Yeah.
I mean, they might have to drive hours to reach a service provider. And even if they are able to do that, oftentimes they're on a wait list for 6, 7, 8, 9 months. That's really, that's super challenging. But okay, so let's go back to your story for a minute.
Yeah.
So you were in Florida and you were watching your wife and you like, God, man, this has got to change.
Right.
You stopped drinking. When you stopped drinking, so I basically, I'm still a drinker, but I used to be a drinker in terms of like probably 3 or 4 nights a week. I would drink 1 or 2 glasses of wine.
Yeah.
And so I'm going with, I promise I'm going to get to your story through my story.
No. I'd rather hear more about your story than I hear mine all the time.
So I kind of did the same thing, and it was actually around COVID. And I was like, I don't like the way this makes me feel.
Yeah.
I have a hard, I was still exercising every day.
Yeah.
I was having a hard time keeping track of things. I was having a hard time exercising.
Yep.
I was tired. I was more tired than I thought I had been in previous years. So I stopped drinking, and I stopped drinking, basically didn't have a drink at all for almost a year.
Right.
I will order a drink sometimes in social situations, which I think this is messed up that I do this, by the way. But I'm working on it because everybody else has ordered a drink.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I will order one and I will drink like half of it, if even that.
Yeah.
Which, why do I do that? Like, that is so.
Well, it's not abnormal. That's actually very normal. There's actually people that will go up to the bar and say, "Hey, pour my Coke and make it look like there's rum in it, but don't put rum in it." But, and again, that's progress. That's progress.
Yeah.
And in the recovery space, 1 foot, 2 foot forward, and you limit your steps back, that's progress. Because it really literally is 1 day at a time. And I think the fact you're cognizant of it and you're making an effort, that's all great. I'll take half a beer, 1 beer over 5.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
And abstinence isn't always the recovery path for people. I don't think abstinence equals recovery. I'm convinced of that. I know in my heart, I could sit down and have a glass of wine and I wouldn't become an alcoholic. I know that. For me, I'm just too disciplined. But it's so easy now not to drink.
It makes you feel so much better.
Yeah. And someone said, "Well, Jeff, I run in sometimes occasionally with the really heavy 12-step advocates, and I love them to death, but it's almost like running into very strong religious people. It's like they really think that their way is the only way and that there's no other option." And I'm like, you know what? My 12 steps is when I park my car and it takes me 12 steps to get to the gravesite of my son and my wife. That's my 12 steps. That's all I need. So you find your own thing that makes you do what you need to do, and I'm all for it. So if it's half a beer, hallelujah. I'm proud of you. If it's 1 beer and you're used to doing 3, that's better. If it's 0, that's better. Whatever works for you.
It is, drinking is such an interesting thing. It's just such a huge part of people's social lives that I have a friend who's single and she dates, and like, she literally said to me one time, well, he seemed interesting, but like on his profile, it said that he was sober, that he didn't drink. So I don't think that would work. And I was like,
Hmm.
I thought that was so, I thought it was so interesting. And then I actually looked at her. I was like, well, you're friends with me and I'm sober. Like, what?
No, I can respect that mindset. I really can. I think sober is becoming sexy today. I think it's becoming cool. I think for men to, and I only have a man's lens, so I can't speak for all women, but I think for men, and you're in an environment and there's impressionable young men, maybe in their 30s or 40s, and they're at a Rotary thing and you order an NA or a glass of water. It used to be you kind of hid behind that. Like you were talking about, you're still kind of stuck in that. I think there's something about now. It's kind of like the cool club. And I had a teenager on our Gen Z board. I've 3 board members on our Gen Z board, and they're like, now it's kind of the cool club. It used to be in high school when I was in high school, or as my kids will say, in the Civil War. Dad, you invented the wheel and fire. But when I was in high school, kids would sit outside and smoke pot, and there was kind of a perception that was kind of the cool club.
Mm-hmm.
Not me, because I was an athlete, so I always looked at them as kind of the potheads. But but now it's like, not drinking is kind of the cool thing. It really is. I mean, Rob Lowe, all these actors are putting out Elton John's been sober for a long time. Alice
Jason
Cooper,
Bateman.
Jason Bateman, Alice Cooper. So I think there's something coming back. And if you go to the Hy-Vees here in Iowa, man, they are the best. I want my kudos to all the Hy-Vees, especially the ones in Cedar Rapids. They have the best non-alcoholic choices. The only thing I'd like to see is move it to a whole separate area so you don't trigger the people in there trying their darndest.
Well, that's a good idea.
Because they go in there and then there's Corona right next to the Corona Light or the NAs, and they're like, it's just, that's one more opportunity. That person that's done a really good job staying sober grabs that 6-pack. It's like, come on, Hy-Vee, we can do better. I'm not criticizing you, but we can move that so those people aren't tempted.
That's a really good idea. Well, maybe somebody will hear this and they'll take your suggestion.
I heard that from somebody actually who's struggling immensely. And they said, I love going to Hy-Vee and buy NAs, but I can't go in the freezer anymore because I get too tempted. And I'm like, okay, Hy-Vee needs to know that.
Yeah. My brother is, he's been sober now for a little over a year.
Mm-hmm.
And, he struggled with it ever since he was a teenager. He's 50 years old and he's doing such a great job. We're also very, very proud of him, but I know he does do the NA thing. So I wonder where if he goes to Hy-Vee, I'll have to ask him about that and see. But anyway,
for any teacher out there, anybody, educator out there that's trying to do the best at their job and their passion, and you're struggling with alcoholism, COVID, 67% increase in alcohol sales during COVID. So, the fact you were doing your thing during COVID just shows how focused you are on it. And I admire that. And it's for the teachers out there, again, like I said, that are struggling. And I know a lot of them. I have a lot of them come up to me after workshops we do, and I'm sure you guys do too. So Jeff, I don't talk about this, but I drink more than I should. They don't say they're an alcoholic because they're struggling with self-diagnosis, especially with the stigma that goes with being an alcoholic educator.
Absolutely.
Alcoholic anything. Doesn't have to be an educator, but that stigma there. I think the fact that we are having these conversations, you're having a podcast, we're having this you've been vulnerable to share your story. I'm obviously very vulnerable sharing my story. The more we can get, teachers to share their stories, to maybe meet for lunch together, have their own little group where they can provide support for each other. You don't have to go to an AA meeting to have community. You can start one yourself. Mm-hmm. At Cedar Rapids Prairie, there's a group called Green Bandana that I'm finding a lot more about. 60 kids at Prairie that just decided to form a mental health advocacy group.
Yeah.
And that's just like freaking beautiful. That's like, we can do it as teachers can do it too. They can form their own group. They don't have to wait for someone to come in and tell them what to do.
Yeah. This is something that I think is really important. I mean, Harvard, published this long study that they've had about social interaction and happiness and how important it is to have social groups and social connection and feeling of belonging and meeting with social groups in terms of their, overall state of well-being. how connected those two things are. And that's exactly what we have some sessions that are set aside at the Iowa Best Conference this year to just allow teachers to network, to exchange numbers, to start
Right.
little support groups or social groups with each other. Even if they were only to connect a couple times a year, it's such a critical piece of a person's well-being and
Right.
their state of happiness and purpose, when they have a community of people who see them and who hear them and make them feel like they have a sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, there's lots of really good things going on with Gen Z. They're huge. They're the largest generation ever. They're 70 million American Gen Zers. But if we know 1 in 5 have had a reported serious mental health issue, that's 14 million Americans. And I tell you what, it's more than 1 in 5. That's only reported. And what's the definition of a serious mental health issue? I mean, there's way too much gray area. I would think it's substantially higher. I'd say it's probably closer to 30 to 40% of high school kids today have had some serious mental health challenge or issue happen to them, reported or not.
It's very significant, and you're right. Those a lot of times are self-report. I mean, there's sometimes we look at emergency room visits and diagnoses and things like that, but a lot of times those surveys are self-report, and we know that a lot of people won't report that.
Right.
Okay, let's we're at about 40 minutes, and I kind of want to, start to end us talking on okay, what are some things that we can maybe think through and talk about that could be helpful to teachers with regards to maybe if they're struggling personally or somebody in their family is struggling personally with a substance abuse issue or challenge, what would maybe be some first steps? And also, if you are going to school, and particularly if you're working with adolescents, not small children, but even sometimes small children, that there's substance abuse issues happening in the home. I mean, I was an elementary school teacher, and I can think of children who I knew were being severely impacted by substance abuse challenges that were happening within the home. If you're a teacher and you're showing up and you're, suspicious of some substance abuse challenges that a student is trying to navigate, what are some things we could tell educators that could maybe help them get started in doing this?
Well, one, it's not a moral failing. It's not. I think there's a challenge that we have in front of us to have these conversations and not have the person that we're talking to feel like they're being implicated, like judged or talked down to. And I tell you what. There's a lot of people out there that it's all rah, toughen up, just you're stronger than this. It's like, what's this? This is that this you're referring to is that you're human. So you're stronger than being human. No, I think there's a new fresh way we can look at this. And for an educator, I would say, listen, really listen, less talk, more listen. Have resources before you start school on a piece of paper by your desk. Suicide resources, local resources. Put me down, heck, on every area. Jeff Johnston. Just email me. Hey, Jeff, I had a conversation. I don't know what to do. I have contacts. You have contacts. All these, we're all in this together. I would say, listen, don't judge, have empathy, not sympathy. There's a massive difference between the psychological impact on the receiver. Whether you're providing sympathy, you'll get over it. Oh, time heals all wounds. Yes. I never wanted to hear that. No. Empathy is, Jeff, what can I do to help promote what you're doing? That's empathy. And with kids, I have found in our research and I think we're really aiming to focus on, especially with purpose, because purpose is a big thing. If you can find purpose, all these other things kind of fall into place. I think I was asked this the other day. I was in Omaha making a presentation. I had someone in the audience say, well, how do you put purpose in not a child, but an adolescent, 14 to 25-year-old? And I got to thinking, I thought, well, what gives me purpose? Well, why would I be any different? What gives me purpose is being in service of others. That gives me purpose. When I get that text, I get that email, I maybe it's not even somebody directly notifying me that I did something worthwhile, but I get that feeling, that altruistic feeling that you can't really describe to somebody. You just feel good.
Yeah.
Giving a homeless person $5. So he spends it on drugs or alcohol. I don't care. It makes me feel good doing that. And the kids don't have that feel good right now because everything's don't do this, don't do that, study for college, blah, 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 blah. And kids have this enormous, and then their girlfriend breaks up with them. Maybe their testing goes well and things just start crumbling. And if they find purpose, they can always go to purpose. So, and how do you do that? Well, maybe there's a humane society in town. Maybe there's a homeless shelter. Maybe there's a fair you can get a table at or volunteer to hand out flyers. I mean, anything is better than nothing.
Yeah.
I think there's something in that.
I think that's huge in finding this Gen Z group. I mean, we both have kids who fall in this Gen Z group. And
my youngest is now 20. So
my oldest is 22. My youngest is 18.
Okay.
And the purpose thing has been what basically when we've had challenges, and like every family, we have had our challenges too.
Yeah. Well,
and this purpose thing is just a really big topic and a concern that I've had, and that I know my girlfriends who have kids at our kids' age, Jeff, just trying to get them in different situations to feel like they really have a contribution, that they have a purpose, that they're passionate about this or that or the other. And it's been really, really hard. It's been even as much as you know, I know about things.
Right.
I feel like we finally are getting there, but I do think also telling your kiddo and educators telling, I've heard educators and parents say to kids, like, what's wrong with you? Like, don't you care about anything?
Yeah.
You know what? They might not right now.
That's the worst. Yeah. You know that. Yep.
But don't make them feel like there's something wrong with them because they haven't found that thing yet. Like, we'll keep trying together.
I kept thinking, how do I answer the question? Jeff, how does a teen find purpose? How do you? I kept thinking and thinking. I thought to myself, well, first of all, many times purpose finds you.
Oh yes.
You don't find purpose, and if you're looking for something, probably won't work. I remember the night I met my wife. I just come out of a relationship, and the last thing I wanted to do that night when we went out with my friends was to, find somebody to start a relationship with. So I was not looking for it at all. And she just walked into the room, and I just knew when I saw her, So, and now, now when you're out looking, it's never there. And I think purpose can work the same way. And so what I did is I took my quote that I use: purpose becomes passion when it gets personal. That's my unique life statement. That's what my marching orders are. It's all over my house. Purpose becomes passion when it gets personal. And I started thinking, how could I take that sentence and how could I make it impactful for kids? Well, let's play it backwards. So this is my secret, how to get kids to find purpose. So I'm talking to a group of high school kids the other day, and I said, you want to find your purpose? If it hasn't found you yet, mine found me through death. Here's how you find it. So take that sentence, write it out. Purpose becomes passion when it gets personal. Just go backwards. Find something personal. Okay. Grandpa died of Alzheimer's. Your mom has breast cancer. Your cousin died by a drunk driver. You just go on: suicide, overdose, fentanyl, whatever. That's personal. That becomes a passion.
Yeah.
From there, you find your purpose. Mm-hmm. So it's beautiful. It just works perfect. It flows one way great. And then when you play it back. So I tell kids right now, be in service, find something personal. Be in service, find something personal. And what kid at 15 doesn't have something personal that they can't subscribe to? Maybe it's just mentorship. Maybe it's you were dyslexic your whole life, and now you've learned that now you've conquered that, and you want to talk to kids about how that can be an asset, not a curse. Like attention deficit can be something helpful, not a freaking disorder that we got to stop telling kids there's one thing that's going to kill me. It's hearing professionals use the word disorder at the end of attention deficit. That's fine amongst yourselves, but we're around young, impressionable minds. Words matter. We're telling kids these are disorders. Stop. Even if they are, I don't care. They don't have to know. So again, going back to that, purpose becomes passion when it gets personal. Find something personal, it'll become a passion. And from then your purpose shows up. And that's resonated well. I hear kids in these workshops really leaning in, taking notes. I don't know if it works, but it's got them thinking.
It does. And it does make sense. And it's a really beautiful way to start. And you're right. If it's not personal, you're not going to be passionate about it. You're not going to stick with it.
Nope.
And it aligns with research. Like if you think of Atomic Habits.
I've read it twice.
Yeah. Like that's basically what he's saying.
Yeah.
Like it has to become part of your identity.
Yeah.
Or the behavior isn't going to change.
I get people say, well, Jeff, how can you do this all the time? Don't you ever get burned out? I'm like, no, I don't. I worry about me sometimes. My kids are all constantly saying, Dad, you need to get out of the house more. You need to go out and do things more. I'm fairly reclusive, which that part of me I don't enjoy, but the fact that I'm not, being pulled in so many different directions allows me to focus on what I really like to do, and that's help kids.
Yeah.
And so there's a fine dance with all this, as an advocate, as are you, as are all the teachers listening, watching later, whatever. You can't be of service to other people if your train is going this way, right towards that cliff. Like I watched my wife and my son. You can't be of service to anybody if yourself is a mess. And so the very first thing you can do to help your kids at school is help yourself first. If you're drinking 5 days a week, go down to 4. That's a win. You don't have to go to 0. If you're 40, 50 pounds overweight, lose 5. Yeah. That's good. If you're sleeping 5 hours a night, sleep 5.5. Just baby steps. Like we tell our kids. Why would adults be any different?
It's true. And that was going to be my big piece of advice. So we're on the same page. You have to get your own personal body, mind, emotions, your environment in order. You're never going to be able to really show up for your students, for your family until you are taking care of you.
And don't you think kids can see that?
Oh,
so Kari, if you and I are talking, I can see within, and I know you fairly well now because we've had a number of conversations, but I could see very quickly on somebody now that I know that they're not really into this conversation, right?
Yes.
Right. So kids can sense it, and that just adds more angst. Why is my teacher stressed? Why is my parent stressed? Why is my coach? It's like, we want to fix the kids. We got to fix ourselves first, and then we can go save the world. But if our generation's a disaster, toxic relationships and substance abuse and poor diets, how in the hell do we think we're going to help the kids?
We're not. You are not. I mean,
right.
I do always have to say this, having been a classroom teacher and even doing work in schools now still, I also recognize teachers, those of you who are listening to this, like I see you, I hear you, I'm in school environments, and I know how difficult some of these systems are that you're trying to work in. And
it's so unsupporting to the teachers.
Yeah.
My heart goes out to them.
I want you to know that like both Jeff and I are not trying to gaslight you.
No.
We feel it. And we want you to know that like at a certain point in time, because I've worked in unhealthy systems too. And I know Jeff, you probably have too. You have to put yourself first, and you have to say the system is, I cannot take care of myself. I cannot take care of my family. I cannot show up for students in this particular system, and I have to look for a different job. And it can maybe still be teaching, but maybe it's just not in that school district or not in that particular school if it is that toxic.
I'm so happy you said that, because if you can't fix yourself for whatever reason, legitimate or self-created, then fix your environment.
Yep, you have to.
I mean, you can do that. You can fix any environment. If you're not in a good marriage, get divorced. You can, if you can't change things to fix your marriage, then get divorced. So it's like, you can always change your environment. It's very difficult to change yourself. I get that. and I'm not gaslighting either. My heart goes out to teachers. I want to find, this is why our Brighten app is so passionate for me. I want to find a way, so as do you, to put in the hands of the teachers and the students a tool to help with these problems. It may not solve the problem. It may not help everybody, but it certainly isn't going to make things worse. And, education's great. I'm all for it, but we need action. We need to start. We can't wait for the government to come in to give us more money to do things. We've got to start doing things, ourselves, our family unit, our neighborhood, our community, our schools, our state, our country, and then the world.
Yeah.
And it has to be in that order.
Yeah.
And again, my heart goes out to teachers. I think this is probably the hardest time in the history of humanity to be in education, because it's the hardest time in the history of humanity to be a teenager.
Oh,
hands down.
Hands down. It is very, very complicated and difficult. And technology has brought lots of complication to this. Our laws, policies, lack of social services. It's a lot. It is a lot to take in. It's a lot to live through and to try to navigate, especially when you're a young adult and you're just starting to try to make your way in this world. It feels very overwhelming.
But I will tell you though, and I think you feel the same way. I've never been more excited for Gen Z mental health right now. I've never been more excited with artificial intelligence, chat GDP, all the things you hear negative about it. These can become our great allies in these systems.
Oh yeah.
And I think if kids, like I said, they sense, they can see angst in adults. So if we can come to them saying, man, today's Wednesday, this is my favorite day of the week. Why? Because I'm alive. Every day I'm alive is my favorite day of the week. It's like, and kids, I remember in high school, the coaches and the teachers that were the most positive were the ones I gravitated to.
Oh, of course, all the time.
Right. So if we have a system where all the teachers there are frustrated and they're mad and they're upset about the lack of support, and I get it. I would be that teacher. I know I would be, because I'm too competitive. I would be very frustrated with the lack of support I was getting. It's like, how can we get more teachers, even if they got to just fake it a little bit, just to be more engaged and more happy and more excited, because that is so important in the confidence and the self-worth for kids. If they can see adults and then they aspire to be that person. How many kids want to be a teacher or a coach if their coach is just down all the time and yelling at people? I wouldn't want to be a coach.
Well, yeah.
That's why kids aren't going into politics today. Most kids don't want to do that because it's just so toxic.
It's so true. I have to do a quick shout out right now to a teacher at City. Hi, AJ Lehman. And I don't know if he'll ever listen to this, but he is a teacher. Then when you were talking, his name came to mind right away. He gets criticized sometimes, I know, because he is like the favorite, right? And
Yep.
I think some people think that he doesn't necessarily hold kids accountable, whatever that might be.
Yeah, whatever that means.
But I'll tell you one thing that he does do. He makes everybody feel loved.
Yeah.
He makes everybody feel like they belong. Even the kids that just hate school.
Yeah.
They go to his class.
Yeah.
And that's what we need. We want
It gives them a reason.
School. We want our kids. There'll be kids who won't go to any other class but his.
Yeah.
That's a start.
It's a heck of a start. And you know what? We're not going to change. I used to say when I was in the investment business, I don't do that anymore, obviously, that to change behavior, there's two ways to change behavior. And you know this: scare.
Oh, yeah.
Or hope. So are we going to scare our way out of this problem? You want to just go yell at kids? Hey, you're going to die of fentanyl. Hey, you're going to go to prison. Hey, you're going to lose you're going to get, do we want to just scare kids? Don't do drugs. Don't do this. Or do we want to say, you know what? There's a lot of love and hope and inspiration in this world. There's more good things going on than bad, but you're in a situation right now where you're just seeing the bad, but the good is all around you. You're just not letting it in. Your heart isn't open. You got to let it in. Mm-hmm. But that comes from the teachers sharing that confidence with their kids.
Yeah.
And if teachers aren't in a good place, it makes it really tough. So as much as I'm trying to help Gen Z, I'm honored to be on this show because the focus is on the environment that teachers are in.
Yeah.
And it's a combination of the teachers, the students, the support they can get. And we know there's a problem. We know the demand is there. It's like, what are we going to do about it? It's going back to that action. It's like, what are we doing that's actionable, but I'm very optimistic. I'm very confident that there's good people in charge of all these things. They're coming up with some really neat ideas. That there's forefronts of mental health out there. The kind of the alternative spaces out there. Lots of research going, lots of money going into it. I think it's great. And we have a generation that, Kari, wants help, and that's how you can't help people who don't want to get helped. That's like recovery 101. Recovery 101. You're an enabler or you're a helper, but you can't help people that don't want to get helped.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. That generation, their heart is open. The majority of them want help. All right, parents, let's build it. They will come. Let's build it. And that's what you're doing. That's what the Scanlon Center for School Mental Health is doing. That's what we're doing.
Yeah. And we both know that those of us who are in this and who do this work, we can't do it alone. Like we all have to be partnering and networking with each other. Like you said earlier, exchanging phone numbers, exchanging contacts, creating systems and networks that are going to be stronger and bigger and broader to support the need, because there is such a huge need.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, I always appreciate my time with you. It always feels like we've had like a 3-minute conversation. I'll look down and be like, oh, we've been chatting for
an hour.
Yeah. So.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Welcome, Drew, to the Scanlon Center for School Mental Health Educator Wellness Podcast. We are so happy to have you with us today.
Well, thank you for having me here. I'm excited to be here today.
Yeah, so today we are going to talk about substance abuse, and we're going to talk about substance abuse in our communities. Like, how did you get to where you are right now in your career path?
Well, I don't know entirely how I ended up where I am. Even though it's a little bit easier to connect the dots looking backwards, graduated high school, went right into the military, was forward deployed for most of my 4 years of service, came back to Iowa, tend to yo-yo back to Iowa somehow, and didn't know what I wanted to do. Went to college, had the GI Bill, got my undergrad at Iowa, then went on to get my master's in social work at Iowa. Again, not really clear on a path forward. Came out of there, did some substance use work, initially kind of early on in my career, substance abuse evaluations, and led a couple groups related to substance use for a short period of time, like the 321J course that the Department of Correctional Services has, working with individuals who had 3 or more OWI convictions, and as well as doing some dual diagnosis work. Through a colleague, I was connected with the work of Foundation 2. I had been looking at something a little bit different, and kind of the rest is history. So I've been at Foundation 2 for just about 10 years now, where I've been involved in all arrays of crisis intervention programming, from more traditional overseeing the crisis line to developing co-responder programs. On the back end, though, really my passion has been in suicide prevention, suicide intervention, which is really kind of defined my career up to this point.
Okay. Yeah. So thinking about your work in substance use, substance abuse, what made you really, you said that actually that a lot of your work now is around suicide prevention, intervention, maybe even some postvention, but what about substance use did you just kind of fall into that work, or did you really see like the prevalence in a certain community that you were in, within your family, within a school, within the military? What drew you to that?
Well, to be quite honest, I've always been interested in kind of the when it comes to substance use, and I'll even throw suicide into it. Well, it's categorized under deaths of despair, as is substance use. And a question that has always bounced around in my brain is not why people use substances. People use substances because they want to feel better in most cases. But why we have such prevalence in our society as a whole? What is it about our society that seems to drive people to substances in order to just feel good, or in many cases just feel normal? And so that has always been an interest of mine, and it overlaps with suicide a lot, in that substances are almost always present at the moment of suicide, especially alcohol. And so there's a lot of overlap with the work I do now. I've been involved in several suicides, and the vast majority, there has been substance use present at the time of suicide. But from a top-down perspective, throughout my career, I've been interested in suffering, why people suffer, how people suffer, but how societies suffer. And again, the question of not why does an individual use substances, but why in our society today do we have such high prevalence of substance use, and why do people feel that is one of the few ways that they can feel good or feel normal?
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit more. What is the prevalence rate?
Well, I believe in any given year, we're talking with adult populations, somewhere around 40 to 50% of adults are using substances in any given year. Obviously, alcohol use is quite high, but marijuana use since legalization has skyrocketed on a state-by-state basis in terms of adults that previously weren't using it. And I think anybody listening to this, whether a provider or a parent, understands the new complexities of marijuana use or cannabis use.
Yeah.
And then in youth populations in particular, I was looking at some data here this morning from like the youth behavior survey. It looks like substance use in teen populations, just like with a lot of syndromes, mental health syndromes and conditions, the rates are higher the older youth get, but seem to have doubled to tripled since 2016 in the data that I was looking at, going up through 2020. And so what does that look like, doubled or tripled? We're talking about in any given year, 12 to 16% of students reporting that in the last year, essentially they used illicit substances, primarily, not talking specifically about alcohol.
Okay, so when you said 40 to 50% of adults, is that abuse, or is that just like including like casual use?
Casual use reporting, okay. And that is adults, I guess, in probably, population size studies admitting to using substances, illicit substances.
Okay. Wow. So did that break it down to like how frequently people were using, like in terms of, 3 to 5 times a week, once a week?
I didn't look at that with adults. I did look at that with youth, and because that's one of the questions on the youth behavior survey I was looking at. And essentially they ask in the last month. And again, rates were pretty similar in the last month, somewhere between 10 and 16% of youth reporting substance use in the previous month. Wow.
And do you remember the age bracket? So is it like 13 to 21 or 13 to 19?
This was looking at high school students, and I think it was broken down. I'll have to look again, but I think it breaks it down by age group, and they actually the CDC does this every 2 years, and it might not be the CDC, and I'm sure you're familiar with the kind of the behavior survey they carry out among high school and middle-aged students, and they ask a whole host of questions around maladaptive behaviors. And so you get it broken down by age group and trends, and it's a pretty robust study. I believe all high school students in the United States do it.
Yeah, they're presented with it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And then the other portion of that too, of course, is it's self-report. So then you have to wonder like how many students are not actually completing it or not willing to like really tell their true story in it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same with adults, right? There's tremendous stigma around substance use. I will say there's kind of an interesting maybe side road is there's stigma within the substance use community between substances as well.
Oh, sure.
And so, certain substances, methamphetamine are even stigmatized within the community. And so it becomes harder and harder to get people to discuss their substance use, understandably, depending on the substance and the context.
So there's something else that you said when you first started talking, and it was, you were talking about how you were mostly interested or really interested in figuring out and learning what about our society pushes people to use substances to escape their reality or to feel normal or to alter their feelings or mindset in some way, shape, or form, right? So, I know that there's not one particular right answer to this, but in all of your work that you've done, where are you at with this right now? Like what if you had to give an answer to us today, what would that answer be? What are your thoughts?
I would say, strictly speaking, around, again, deaths of despair, which we lump substance overdose and suicides into deaths of despair. I would say mostly societal and environmental stressors. Certainly mental health conditions play a role, but the truth is substance use rates and suicide rates are not equal across different societies. And so say the United States and Japan have different rates. And over my career, increasingly policy decisions, societal expectations, lack of safety net, and social policies, and then of course substance use is not equal across socioeconomic status, and so we tend to see higher rates among lower socioeconomic status individuals. And it makes a lot of sense why. We could dig into that probably all day long, but I have increasingly leaned towards cultural and societal or environmental drivers as much as internal drivers.
Sure. Okay, so if we're starting to think about our school communities and the health of our teachers and the health of our students in our schools, and one thing, so I do a lot of wellness work in schools, and I go in and we talk about 8 dimensions of wellness and building, positive and healthy habits in our daily lives. And one thing that's happened in the last few years since we've been able to be back in schools in the last couple of years, that has never happened to me before in all the PD that I've done in schools in the last 20 plus years in this career, is I'm having more and more educators pull me off to the side during breaks or at the end of our sessions, and almost and I'm not a priest by any means, but it feels like in almost some kind of confessional way, telling me about their use with alcohol and how and weed, and how they know that things are getting so bad with their professional lives and their personal lives, and they're really leaning on that, and they want some advice on how they can basically taper or reduce their use of substances in their daily lives, and make healthier choices for themselves, lean into something else. First of all, are you seeing more and more of this with your clients or people that you're working with? And then what's some pieces of advice that you're giving them?
Yeah, it's a great point. And you mentioned alcohol and weed. Weed is, again, from a provider standpoint, has increasingly become a extremely complicated topic because of widespread legalization, but also because of really complicated mixed messaging around weed use with adults. For instance, one thing I've seen a significant rise in my work is adults using weed for sleep. It's probably the most common reason that I get reported to me. The research on it seems to be in line with alcohol use for sleep. It might increase quantity, but not quality of sleep. It might interfere. But having these conversations with clients, or having these conversations as a society, we haven't done ourselves any favors in that. For, I would say, from the 30s up until the early 2000s, there was a lot of complicated messaging around marijuana that wasn't exactly honest. And that has undermined, in a lot of ways, I believe, the ability of professionals to really have candid conversations around substance use. In addition to that, one of the things that we have to be aware of, especially with teens, is they can fact check us pretty quickly. And so if we're giving them information that isn't correct, or is complicated or debated within the field itself, they'll walk out to if I'm doing therapy, they'll go out to their car in the parking lot and look it up and fact check me. And so messaging has become extremely complicated around it. It has made it harder for professionals and providers to have those conversations. Again, I see a lot of people using marijuana in particular for chronic pain, sleep. I mentioned sleep already, medicating mental health issues, which is, of course, goes back quite a ways, but particularly now in lieu of kind of societal movements against pharmaceutical companies. So there's just a whole lot of complicated factors that seem to make it easier for one to rationalize personal use of these substances instead of maybe seeing a psychiatrist and pursuing other avenues of psychotropic support and whatnot. When it comes to substance use in general, I think the first question for an individual is why they're using it.
Why?
And what is the purpose of using it? What does it do for them? Almost from kind of a strictly behaviorist standpoint. And that really opens up the door for intervention if the person is interested in intervention and identifies that that's a value of theirs and a goal of theirs.
Mm-hmm. What does it do? What does the use of weed or long-term use of marijuana and or alcohol do to the brains and bodies of, let's say, a developing child or adolescent?
Yeah, and I think that's really where a lot of the more recent research has focused, is on understanding the impact of marijuana on developing brains, which I would say go all the way up through mid-20s, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly not ending at 18. Although if I had to beg a youth or a kiddo not to use, I would at the very least beg them to put off usage until their 20s, if they were willing to negotiate or mediate on that condition. This is where it gets complicated, is even looking at the research, the effects of THC on the brain are complicated and not entirely well understood. That said, it interacts with the cannabinoid system, and it makes sense. At the very least, we should agree that when you introduce substances into the brain, regardless of what those substances are, they're going to likely modify internal processes that the brain is already doing. And THC use in general seems to do that, whereas the brain becomes reliant on the THC connecting to the cannabinoid system. And this is getting into an area that's for people way smarter than me. But when that is discontinued, tolerance builds with weed use, just like it does with alcohol use.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to use more and more. In addition, marijuana being produced today, this is pretty well established, is much more potent than what it was, even 20 years ago. And so we have youth putting much more powerful amounts of weed into their body through various means, right? So we have smoking, vaping, edibles, and even now, although it's a little side category, we have like oils and skin lotions and stuff like that. And so the variety out there presents its own challenges, but first and foremost, smoking and vaping, which has kind of the most research behind it, absolutely impacts brain chemistry, brain development, but also you're putting things into your lungs as well, that we don't want in youth. Now, in terms of what impact does it seem to have? Well, it seems to, I mentioned a little bit earlier that a lot of people, there seems to be a large amount of people using marijuana for sleep disturbances. It seems to interfere with sleep quality, similar to alcohol, and that melatonin production. And so what you'll hear a lot from people who use marijuana, just like with alcohol, is they'll fall asleep quicker, but they won't feel as rested the next day. In youth, we see irritability. We see behavioral issues. Seems to potentially, I say seems a lot because the research isn't clear, increase anxiety and depressive symptoms in teens, although again, the mechanisms aren't clear. And then for at least 2 decades now, there has been research looking at marijuana use in youth and the development of psychotic disorders, specifically schizophrenia, later in life.
Yeah.
But again, the pathways of this are not entirely clear in a way that is easy to articulate to a client in front of you, and that's where it gets really complicated and hard. But there does seem to be correlation, if not causation, in a lot of those areas.
So one thing that I'm thinking of too, when you're talking about like the impacts that substances have on, the brains and bodies of youth and even adults, is, really when we think about like emotional regulation, when we think about responsible decision making, when we think about self-awareness and social awareness and like these skills for learning or life skills that all humans need to have and fine-tune throughout their lives in order to have a healthy, productive life, to keep a job, to advance in their career, to learn what they need to learn in schools, to be able to build healthy connections with people. When you're constantly depending on a substance to get through tough and uncomfortable moments, you're cheating yourself opportunities to learn those skills in those moments, like emotional regulation and responsible decision making and relationship skill building. You're robbing yourself of opportunities to keep building those skills and fine tuning those skills and letting those skills mature, because you're just numbing them. So even if we don't know, even if the research says like there's some contradictions, or we're still unclear, we haven't gathered enough data, whatever that might be, we do know, right, that like if you don't have opportunities to build those skills in the moment that you're having those uncomfortable feelings, in your own state of mind and being, that those skills don't get developed.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think in the school of acceptance and commitment therapy, they would frame it as workability in terms of coping mechanisms. And so the way they present that is they say, well, how workable of a solution is this? And if substance use, as you mentioned, becomes the coping mechanism of an individual, whether they're a youth or an adult, whether that alcohol is probably the most common, when I feel stressed, I drink beer, it makes me feel not as stressed. Well, how workable of a solution is that as you make your way through life? Is that a workable solution in the majority of scenarios you find yourself? And the answer is, of course not. Right. And the other part of the workability solution is, what does it cost you? And so the one thing I'll say with substances, and you're kind of hitting on this, is they also take away from being present, and they take away from being present in experiences that can be important to us. There are times in our life where we don't want to be present. This would be the conversation I'd have with my kiddos, and that's okay. But there's many situations in life where we want to be present, or we need to be present. And if we are using substances, we're almost certainly not as present as we could be to that experience and to that situation.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point too. Like really trying to have these conversations with our kids that emphasize what you just said to, what you're saying to your kids is, listen, it's completely normal to not want to be present in certain situations. Like that is going to happen. I mean, Jesus, I don't know how it happens to me on a daily basis, but it's going to happen. But then like, how are you going to, in a healthy way, work through those situations? And the more that people do this, like work through uncomfortable situations, first of all, they become less uncomfortable, right?
Right.
But also we increase confidence in knowing that we can do hard things.
Yeah.
It's okay.
I also think too, I mean, it's fair to say, in a lot of and this goes back to, I think the complication of substance use is that, frequently when you talk with individuals who use substances as a coping mechanism, and again, this is anecdotal, but what you'll hear is it works in the short term, but there are costs in the long term. And for whatever reason, we could get into it, I guess, we could bring an anthropologist in here and talk about kind of the evolution of humans. But we're pretty good at short-term fixes for unwanted experiences. And we're pretty bad at long-term fixes for unwanted experiences. And when I talk about unwanted experiences, I'm talking about pain, internal depression and anxiety, and the reasons that people tend to self-medicate on substances. When you work with clients or individuals that have used substances, to soften unwanted experiences, a lot of the times they'll say, when you ask them about the cost, it takes away from these other areas of my life. Again, going back to being present in terms of enjoying the evenings, being there with my family, being able to go for walks. It just has a lot of long-term consequences anytime we rely on a substance, again, as a primary coping skill, or to self-medicate ourselves.
It is true. I mean, I'm really, I'm not sober in terms of like, I never ever drink, but compared to how much I drank even, 3-4 years ago, I'm about as close to sober as a person could possibly get. I rarely have alcohol in my life. When I say that, I mean like 5 or 6 times a year. But I tell you what, you don't even realize it actually until you become sober, or at least I didn't. I mean, I knew it was a big part of our society and our lives, globally, actually, right? But when you start to stop drinking and you're out in social situations, or you go to dinner parties, or even work parties sometimes and get-togethers, it is so interesting to me how people react when I'm like, oh, I really don't drink. Or even dating too. Like, it's a no-go for some people. Like, if you're not going to drink, if you're not going to have alcohol with them in the evening, then they're like, well, I can't date you. Isn't it? I mean, I just can't. When you stop to think about it that way, like how prevalent it is and what a big role it plays in our social lives, it's like, no wonder, right? No wonder we go to this, because it's just so accepted and almost like encouraged.
Well, it is encouraged. I agree with that. And then to put yourself in not that you're a human. So you've been in the place of a youth or a minor who doesn't really even have the tools an adult has to assert their self or their needs, to the degree that, a 30 or 40 or 50-year-old or whatever has. And so youth are facing the same
were you
fear.
Guessing my age there?
No, I was not guessing your age at all. A 20-year-old.
Do you think I'm 50?
A 20-year-old. But if you take a 16 or 17-year-old, they don't even have those tools. And so the peer pressure is tremendous. And again, with the complicated legalization status of marijuana, those conversations, even among peers, are very difficult to have, because there's misinformation, quasi-true information, and true information all out there intermingled among each other on the risk factors for substance use. And so it's hard as an adult to not use substances. It's extra hard as a youth.
Yeah. It's hard for adults to talk to kids about it. I mean, you just said that. I'm repeating what you just said. I'm not, you said it first, but I've tried, we have substance abuse issues in my own family, extended and immediate family. And when I've tried to have conversations with my own children and with some of their friends, it's exactly what you just said. They will Google and Google and Google, and oftentimes find things that they really want to hear. Of course, that's human nature. We all do this. It's confirmation bias, but it is really difficult right now to have the conversation with them about the dangers and how it really does, impact your brains and your bodies long term. And I think that's like the difficulty that teachers are having too, right? Like, if they even bring it up in schools and in their classrooms, they are feeling kind of like this pushback as well.
Yeah. I think it's very challenging to have that conversation, especially as a parent or a therapist. And in addition to that, I'm always thinking, I want to have the conversation in a way that if my kids do use substances, they'll still talk to me about that substance use. And so lectures don't really work. If lectures worked, we wouldn't need therapists. We wouldn't need substance use counselors. We wouldn't need any of that. We wouldn't need prisons or jails. And so how do you as a parent, how do you as a provider, providers are in the same kind of group a lot of the times, in that if we have a teen client in front of us, we want them to understand the risk, but we also want them to be open with us about communicating what they're doing. So we can't blow through rapport with them. How do you have the conversation in a way that is productive, but not further stigmatizing it, and also not scaring your child out of having further communication with you around it. Personally, I would rather, if my kids are using it, they talk to me about it rather than they hide it from me. And so I need to keep that door open.
I want to stop. I mean, I'd like to emphasize what you just said. And unfortunately, so my children are 22 and 18. And I always say to people at this point in time in my parenting, my journey as a parent, you could tell me anything and I would not be surprised. I mean, I've between the two of them and all of their friends that hang out at my house, I have heard it all. I have seen it all. I swear to you, I've experienced it all. And, when I was a younger parent and they were starting to experiment and do things that I was finding out about, that was a really big mistake that I made, Drew, really big. And I think it made it even worse. I did this thing looking back now that, of course, I'm ashamed of and I totally regret. But, I went this punitive route. Knowing now what I know about what was going on, I was using shaming tactics and super unhealthy and super unproductive. Luckily, I had enough of a good relationship with one of my children that I'm talking about that he still would talk to me about it and mostly be honest, not all the time, trust me. But, and now we still talk about it, but those tactics don't work.
Yeah.
You can sit there and talk about taking things away and punishing and scaring all you want. And I am telling you, I've seen it time. And my parents did it to one of my siblings. I tried it with one of my own kids. I've seen other parents do it with their kids. I'm in schools all the time. Yeah. I know a lot about behavior and punishment. It does not work.
Right. And I think in addition to that, at some point, in the development stage of a kid, their friends become more trusted than their parents. Mm-hmm. And so not only, will they tend to hide substance use, but your lecturing on them quickly becomes secondary to the expertise of their friends and peers who, we know that with teens in general, interpersonal interactions, they're extremely sensitive to those. And they play a very large role in their lives and worlds. And so it is an extremely hard conversation to have. It's harder to have today, at least in my experience, than it was even 10 years ago, because of the proliferation of marijuana out in the United States.
So, we've talked about, this shaming and punishment. It doesn't work. We need to build healthy relationships, keep this bilateral kind of conversation, open conversation, going with our youth and even with our colleagues and our friends and family, in order to reduce that stigma and to, help get people help when they need help. What are some of the signs? What are some of the signs and symptoms where things are getting really out of control, maybe even for ourselves or that you can see in other people?
Well, and we talk about substance use broadly in the DSM-5, which is the handbook. I have my DSM-5 right next to me, although I don't have the TR. But the handbook, right here. I just casually read. I was just reading this this morning. But
just a casual read.
Just a casual read. The disorders themselves actually are broken up by type. And so you have cannabis use disorder, you have alcohol use disorder, you have opioid use disorder. And like all of the syndromes in the DSM-5 and disorders in the DSM-5, there's clinical criteria, but probably the as a heuristic, most professionals fall back to, well, has it had an impact on your life in a social responsibility sort of way? And so that really is kind of the default when it comes to substance use is, has it impacted school? Has it impacted ability to work? Has it impacted any of your social relationships? Or has there been legal or professional, have you lost a job because of substance use? Have you been suspended or expelled from school? Hopefully we're not doing that, but that would be an example. And we're really looking at signs from the person's life that substance use has crept up and caused issues as they navigate the world. Of course, with many substances, we also have physiological symptoms that can be pretty terrifying. With alcohol, delirium tremens, things of that sort, that also would be a sign of a pretty significant substance use disorder. But with marijuana use, the withdrawal is a little more subtle. But certainly, if we saw withdrawal, we would suspect that it was, the body had become physiologically dependent on that. And paradoxically, inability to sleep is one of the withdrawal symptoms from marijuana use. In addition to, one of the other kind of, I would say, heuristics around signs and symptoms of substance use struggles is an inability to quit, even when one wants to. And so what you'll often hear with like marijuana use is, well, I'm planning on quitting. And then, I went 2 or 3 days and then X happened. And you can enter any number of scenarios there. And so I fell back to it. Well, that's a sign that the individual is struggling to actually quit or decrease the amount. And so I would say those two are the first one being, has it impacted you out in any way in your life that you could quantify? And second being, have you tried to quit and have you struggled to quit?
Yeah, that's really good advice. And definitely, for those of us who have experienced this in our own lives or have seen this happening to other people close to us, then those, I'm sure that you can think of specific scenarios and situations that you've experienced with them. And it's really scary.
It is. And I even think, it can, even with adults, a lot of the time, we'll give alcohol as an example. A lot of adults will drink, say, wine in the evening, beyond, the SAMHSA has recommendations around alcohol consumption in terms of, I think it was 7 standard drinks for a male, 14 for a female was kind of a heuristic they used to use. I don't know if they've updated that criteria, but you'll find, adults that have a glass of wine or 2 each night. And when they, maybe they identify that the alcohol use is contributing to sleep problems, as alcohol use does in the evening, they try to cut back and they're just not able to do it. And so maybe they just try to drink earlier in the evening, and you can kind of see the cycle of struggles around discontinuing use.
There's that research, because I read that research a lot about like what is a healthy use of alcohol, because we were also given all kinds of information. Yeah. So now I am going to date myself. So I'm 45. So I don't remember, Drew, I suspect I'm quite a bit older than you, but I don't remember if you remember, like particularly like in the 80s when studies were coming out that like you should drink a certain amount of red wine every single day and for heart health. And then it kind of like even, escalated, or not. Well, yeah, it kind of did. And just kept going like into the 90s. Well, since then, actually, we have figured out that those studies actually were false. That basically the people that they put, and you maybe know this, but the people that they put in those studies already had health conditions, the ones that were sober. That's why they were sober, is because they already had heart issues. They already had, other kinds of really chronic health conditions. So that's why they were sober. So then when they compared them to the people who were like moderate drinkers, then those moderate drinkers like did, the indicators that they were using, those seemed to be healthier or better. But the problem is that the control group was actually already sick.
Yeah, and I think now the guidelines, and maybe not guidelines is the wrong term, but now what you see out there is any amount of alcohol use is harmful. The struggle from a provider or a provider standpoint, as you say that now, and what you get is the same thing you get, with a lot of things with adults as well. They used to say this, and then they said this, and it was healthy, and it's not healthy, and it's healthy, and it'll be healthy again. Or you get some kind of general reference to like, well, the French have it at every dinner, and look at them. There's, you get these kind of offhand marks. But you're right in that the information around alcohol use, just like with marijuana use, has been all over the place over the the lifespan of most adults. And it makes it harder to have those conversations.
It does. I have to tell you, there's, I don't know if you listen, well, we're doing a podcast right now, but I listen to Science Versus a lot. I don't know if you're familiar with this podcast,
I'm
but
not.
there's a Science versus alcohol episode that's really good. Those of you who haven't listened to that, then I highly encourage you to do that. There's another one too, and I'm looking at my phone right now if you could see me. Oh, Maintenance Phase. There's another one on this podcast called Maintenance Phase, all about alcohol. And it is like the latest research about the use of alcohol and what it does to our bodies. And listen, you guys, I'm not saying that you should never have a sip of alcohol. Like, that's not what Drew and I are telling you. We're just telling you that, like, really be critical about the research that you read and what you're getting out of those articles. And we all, I mean, I drink way too much coffee. Like, nobody's perfect, right? But we're just, I guess I'm trying to highlight with Drew here that we have received a lot of misinformation about alcohol and what it does to our bodies. And those are two recent podcasts that you could listen to that give you some really good information about the use of alcohol.
Yeah, I think that's and part of this reflects just the advances in science and in biology and understanding the mechanisms. It would be strange if we still abided by criteria from the 1980s, and yet, as Freud pointed out so aptly, the psyche has several ways to rationalize behaviors. And with substances in particular, pointing out the flaws in messaging across time and space seems to be a pretty potent way to rationalize substance use. To say, well, does anybody really know? Because look at the complications in government messaging around it. And you can point to the "Just Say No" campaign from the 90s, which was in hindsight was bizarre and a very strange approach. But on the other hand, I think one could argue that these are advances, and this is a good thing. It's good that we're updating criteria and we're understanding it better. And science is dynamic, and substance use, the impact of substance use is a science, and it is going to reflect that kind of dynamic process of science.
Yeah. Well, Drew, I really want to tell you how much I am thankful for you and your work, and taking the time to come on the show today and just kind of talk through some of the signs and symptoms of, using alcohol or drugs maybe too much in our lives and what that can do to our bodies and to our communities. So again, thank you. And I really appreciate you and your work. And I hope that we can continue connecting and doing this work together.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation, and I really appreciate it, and hope that someone listening out there gets something from it.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Drew.
Thanks, Kari.
I think my biggest takeaway from my conversations with Jeff and Drew is how prevalent substance abuse is in our world, not just this country, but in our world. I think you would be really hard pressed to talk to somebody who hasn't been affected in some way by substance abuse, whether personally they have struggled with it, or they have been a part of a family who's struggled with it, had a family member who has struggled with it, or a friend. We oftentimes talk about how cancer affects everybody. And I think, we sometimes don't talk about how substance abuse has such a big impact on the health and well-being of our children, of our adolescents, and the adults in this world. I think that, we have really normalized leaning into alcohol and almost think it's funny when we do this, when we're struggling with difficult and uncomfortable feelings. And I feel like it's time that we start having really honest conversations with ourselves and with our families about the appropriate ways and the healthy ways that we can use alcohol in our lives, and how we model that to our students and to our children in our homes. Some of the really big statistics that stuck out to me when I was doing this episode, I will share with you, because I think it's important for us to know these things. According to the National Center for Drug Abuse Statistics, drug use among eighth graders between 2016 and 2020 increased by 61%. 61%. 62% of teenagers in 12th grade have abused alcohol. 50% of teenagers have misused a drug at least once. 21% of eighth graders have tried illicit drugs at least once, and 11% of overdose deaths are aged 15 to 24. And then we might ask ourselves, well, okay, what's this connection or what's this relationship between mental health and substance abuse? Well, according to the Child Mind Institute, if not treated, almost half of kids with mental health disorders will end up having a substance abuse or disorder, which of course makes it harder to treat mental illness and has a significant impact on their future and then of course the future of our communities. If we're not taking care of individuals and communities, it negatively impacts all of us. And I think this really just brings us back once again to this big question of how do we start to work together, to advocate together for conditions that allow us to thrive, not just survive. I invite you to share your thoughts, comments, and suggestions with me at scsmh-maine@uiowa.edu. I'm always happy to hear from you. You can give me your questions. You can give me suggestions. We love to hear from you. Thank you for joining me today. And until next time, I'm your host, Dr. Kari Vogelgesang, forever cheering you on.